Hi, soul friends. It's Tannaz Hosseinpour, and welcome back to another episode of Minutes on Growth. Today, I have Joshua Cameron with us. He is a combat veteran and a master healer. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having this space for me.
Of course, I am so excited to get into this conversation because, as I was telling you earlier, I have dealt with trauma manifesting, physically in my body you know, as I was unable to process my trauma, it showed up in a different way. So I
Mm.
really want to get into this. But before we do, can you just take a moment and tell us, what is trauma and how does it manifest, physically, emotionally, spiritually?
That's a great question. Now, as far as these sorts of complex answers, usually, well, the best thing to do is to create a model of the world,
Mhm,
right? Is my definition of trauma going to be your definition? Well, I don't know that it necessarily even needs to. It's really
mhm,
a matter of, if I have a map, does my map allow me to get to my destination? And if it doesn't, well, then that map's not very useful. If it does, well, then that map is very useful. And so I think it's really good to look at these sorts of spiritual ideas, these non-physical, these conversations around non-physical ideas, in that way. How do I create a map that best serves me? And trauma, is really something which the mind cannot really grasp what just happened. It's so outside of our model of the view. Our model of the world has been so violated
mhm,
that there's almost like a 404 error, right? If you ever gone to a website and that's not actually linked, it gets 404, right? Website not found. Well, we don't really know what to do.
mhm,
And what happens is, often our brain will go into fight or flight mode,
mhm,
right? So all the blood is sucked from the frontal lobe into the limbic system, and then we're in survival.
mhm,
Now, the problem is since we haven't actually processed, right, that traumatic event in our intellectual capacity, in our, using our mental power, well, then anytime that we reflect on it, or rather, anytime something reminds us of it or triggers us, well, what happens is we go right back into that fight or flight.
mhm.
And so we rob ourselves of the conditions necessary to be able to process, right, that trauma. And it just stays in, oh my God, I'm in a state of threat. So really, trauma is a way to transport us into a state of threat where we feel like our life or our livelihood is being completely threatened.
Wow, I love how you said that, we can have different definitions and it's okay. It's more of like the map. And I thought that was such a validating perspective because sometimes, we say like we have these conversations or, we see these content on social media where like trauma is this. And in that moment, it's not really relatable to us. And it kind of invalidates our experience and kind of makes us question, did I experience trauma? Like, am I going through something or is it just in my
Mhm.
mind? So I really like the way that you put it. I felt it was very, very validating. And then I wanted to ask you, when you said, it takes us back to that primary experience. And I was thinking of an interview I heard a while back where someone was saying if you, for example, were physically assaulted by someone who, let's say, was wearing a specific perfume, let's say Dior Sauvage for just the sake of it, and years have passed and you're with someone and you smell the same scent, you smell the perfume, the body can't tell the difference and kind of takes you back to that
Mm.
initial experience you had, and it starts to feel as if it's reliving that experience. Is that accurate?
I would say that that's very accurate. And in fact, there's this idea that shamans have of soul retrieval. You ever heard that before?
No, can you talk about it, please?
Yeah. So think of this traumatic experience as a way to where your soul has almost splintered off. A piece of
Mhm.
yourself is now trapped in a prison, right? Until we can process, right, that memory, we can process that trauma. A piece of ourselves is trapped there, which is why we try to go about our day. We try to, for in most cases, forget about it, forget
Mhm.
about what this happened. But then there's something that triggers us, and then we know that, hey, there's a part of us that's trapped. And what soul retrieval is this idea of Imagine that we are, cybernetic beings, because in many ways we really are.
Mhm.
And that traumatic experience creates an error in the code. And when we go back to find that person, right? In my case, my most traumatic experiences really happened when I was a young child.
Mhm.
And so what I found was had the ability to go back in time, find where the code was first perverted, first
Mhm.
corrupted, right? Find that kid who was desperate for the love that he needed so much. And what did I do? Well, I corrected the error code. I gave him the love that he needed. And I was able to liberate him from that prison, which then didn't make the memories disappear, but it made all the emotions tied up around it. They just release and they're no longer there, to where I can now reflect upon that. And now there's no longer any sort of error, any sort of block in the flow, anything that keeps us trapped in that space. We
Mhm.
can now think upon it and then look at it as, maybe a path that was meant for us to work up the strength to become who we need to become in the world.
Wow. And if we don't do the work, if we don't go back to, to that moment where, the error first took place, does that end up manifesting in chronic pain? Like, how does unresolved trauma start to manifest itself?
I love that question. So there's this idea in the Kabbalion that as above, so below, as below, so above.
Mhm.
And the mind will often bear witness to something that it can't reconcile. Again, its model of the world, our model of the world has been violated.
Mhm.
Well, what's lower than the mind is the body. Even though the brain and the body are one, right? There's something
Mhm.
different about mentality, right, in the mind from the brain, and the body only has one way in which to communicate.
Mhm.
That's right, emotions, and feelings. And let me ask you something: is chronic pain something that you can feel?
No. Like, yes, like you're feeling it every single day, but it's not, for me, it's not like where it starts and where it ends. It's just constantly there.
Mm. And so chronic pain is the body's way of turning the light on the dashboard of the car,
Mhm.
right? And most often people will see that light and like, well, what the hell? Right?
Yeah.
My car's trying to let me know that I need to go get an oil change, or that my oil's running low, or that my car that the tire pressure is low, or whatever. Check engine, like, oh, like you're trying to warn me. Well, that's annoying. I was
Mhm.
really enjoying listening to my music, and what most people do is they turn their music up. So as they're hitting that rumble strip, right, and then there's that warning light coming on, well, they just turn their music up even louder. And in the way the universe works is the law of escalating feedback,
Mhm.
right? So what happens is when our model of the world's been violated, well, we usually have a feeling deep within us. Maybe it's an unsettling feeling in our gut, right?
Mhm.
And then if we don't process that, well, that unsettling feeling will then manifest, right? Escalating feedback will manifest into pain, because the body is trying to get our attention in a way in which we cannot ignore it, saying there is an unhealthy state of things that needs to be, set right.
Mhm. Right. So took me back a couple of years as you were talking. I was like, wow. So I think it was like 5 years ago, my grandfather passed away, and we had so many ceremonies to take care of. And like everyone in our family just went into fight or flight. Like they just kind of, they actually all froze. They weren't
Oh
able
no.
to do anything. So I pretty much had to, step up and take care of, so many things. I was very close to him. So I was already sad, but I wasn't allowed to be sad because, we had things to get done. And I remember 3 weeks after he passed away, I was literally in the gas station. I bent down to pick up a bottle of water and I couldn't get back up. And this is like I was a super healthy kid. Like I could not imagine that this was happening to me. I was rushed to the hospital. They did an MRI and they're like, yeah, your like disc is inflamed and you can't walk. And they were like injecting me with so many different cortisones and trying to bring down the inflammation, and nothing would work.
Mm,
And so
yeah.
for 6 months, I was on bed rest, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't sit. It was so, so bad until I met a healer and he said, let me try it. Like you've gone the regular medical route and it's not working. And so he started to like put his finger on certain pain points on my body, and I would scream, Joshua. Like, I can't even tell you, like, you would think that he's beating me up, but all he was doing was putting his finger on certain points, and he just kept telling me, let it go, like, cry it out, let it out, scream it
Yeah.
out. And within a month or two, I was walking again, and I was thinking to myself, wow, like that unresolved um, pain, that unresolved trauma of having to step up and kind of take care of everything and not being able to grieve, and just like so many things that happened during that week really manifested in this weird physical ailment, like disease. Like literally, the body was no longer at ease.
Well, and if you think about your symptoms there, right? Let's take a step back and think about the way
Mhm.
in which we communicate, to ourselves, to each other. Well, if somebody is feeling sad, right,
Mhm.
and we want them to not be sad, typically we don't actually, talk to them and help them process their emotions. We just say, hey, back straight, head up,
Mhm.
right? Shoulder your responsibility. And does it,
Mhm.
if these are, axioms which that we, pass back and forth, doesn't it kind of make sense that the back is what's been holding all of that energy?
Wow. Yeah, you're right.
And so there's different areas of our body,
Mhm.
and there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason to it, but there's different areas of our body that will start to store this, and usually it comes in the form in which we believe and we speak, especially to
Mhm.
ourselves, right? As Americans, we fetishize this idea of being our own worst enemy.
Mhm.
And what a terrible thing to have inside of your mind. An evil Jiminy Cricket that at any point will just jab you and just let you know how much lesser that you really are, how you're really not good enough, right? You're not strong enough. Why would you do that? You're so stupid. And what a terrible, terrible thing to do to ourselves, because what we're doing is we're holding on. Anytime we do something, instead of processing it, letting it go, we're holding on to it, and then we're putrefying it. As we're putrefying it, well, then the body is screaming for our help. And how does
Mhm.
it scream? Well, it screams in the form of pain.
Wow. So the way we talk to ourselves also can exasperate the pain.
100%, right? Think so I'm a really big fan of the Tao Te Ching, right? I love
Mhm.
ancient wisdom that is all around flow. In fact, I was listening to, one of my mentors, Ed Stracher, had a conversation with a man by the name of Dennis Stevenson, and he mentors, different executives from, Apple or Wells Fargo, right? People who are already multimillionaires in order to help them build their wealth even more. And everything he talks about is flow.
Mhm.
And anxiety, right? When we feel anxiety in our bodies, well, anxiety is the feeling of growth, but most people aren't really told that. So they're like, hey, I feel funny, I don't really like this feeling. I'm now going to resist this feeling. And the problem with the resistance is that friction that creates, well, it just builds and compounds. And with all energy needs to flow. And as we're resisting, well, what happens is we're creating blocks in that flow. In the same way that you might hear if you have a swamp cooler or some sort of air that's blowing in your house and you just crack a window, right? It starts whistling, right? Because it's being forced through a very small opening. Well, as we're narrowing our flow, well, our body will start to make noises. Maybe it'll start to whisper. It'll start to let us know, hey, there's something not right here. And then again, the law of escalating feedback. It might start talking a little bit louder, saying, hey, there's something not right here. Eventually, you'll start going to pain because we're starting to block this off, but that flow is still trying to go. It's still trying to push through, but we're creating these pains. And until we can let go, right, of that block and get that flow going again, well, that pain is there to remind us not that we're bad, not that we're good, but that we have a lesson to learn and we haven't learned it yet.
Mhm. How do we let go of that block? I know we block it because at some level we're trying to protect ourselves. It's like a coping
Mm.
mechanism, a defense mechanism. But are there any practical steps that we can take to kind of A, become aware that the block is there,
Mm.
and B, to become a little bit more comfortable with feeling the feelings and letting the block, subside little by little?
I love that question. Well, meditation is probably the best thing that you can do for your life, period. It doesn't really, doesn't mean that you always meditate. It doesn't mean that you constantly meditate and expect the world to fall into your lap as, you're just meditating for hours and hours and hours on end. But the reason why meditation is important is because it allows us to quiet the mind. The mind is where all the noise is. The
Mhm.
mind is where, as we're raised, and think of even little innocuous things like, Tannaz, what do you want to do when you grow up? You might be like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. And people around you might be like, well, that's stupid. That doesn't make
Mhm.
sense. Why would you want to do that? Wouldn't you want to rather do something that I think would be good for you? And then we start to get our minds filled with all this noise that has nothing to do with who we are, that has nothing to do with our purpose. And we start listening to what other people think. And the problem with that is most everyone else has no idea what they want, but they are more than happy to tell us what they think is good for us.
True.
And right. And so now we're following bad advice, which is compounded because there's bad advice for them and they're giving it to us and we're just accepting it. And we're assuming there must be something wrong with us. So meditating, what it does is anyone who's ever done data analysis, like I have, there's this idea that you have to quiet the noise to increase the signal.
Mhm.
And when you allow the mind to go still in meditation, you can start to tap into the body. You can start to tap into, hey, what's going on here? Hey, where do I feel, right? Maybe I've got some tightness, in my body somewhere. What sort of emotions come up when I tune into that? When I ask my body with curiosity, not, hey, body, you're bad. Why are you doing this to me? But like, hey, body, thank you. I love you. You've been here for me. You've helped me. What is it that you're trying to, what am I holding on to?
Mhm.
And then just allow, there's probably gonna be something that's going to come to your mind. You're probably going to dismiss it, right? That's just how we are. But that first thing that comes to your mind is most likely going to be the key to start to unravel that.
Wow. So I always say ask through prayer and receive through meditation. So
Yeah.
just sit in the silence and have the answers flown to you. Wow. Okay. So question. And everyone has this question. People say, I'm not good at meditating. I'm not good
Hmm.
at meditation. Like, I try to be still, but I have a million and one thoughts coming into my mind. What do I do? How do I start? I'm going to give up. It's not for me. What advice would you give to those people?
Well, if you feel that, you're likely doing meditation correctly. Like, wait,
Mhm.
what? How is that correct? Well, because the mind doesn't want the noise to go away. So if you start feeling how uncomfortable it is, well, you're probably doing it right because otherwise you wouldn't have noticed that. And the thing is so often people approach meditation as, um, I'm having these thoughts. I need to quiet these thoughts. I need to make these thoughts shut up. I need to go ahead and make them silent. Right. In much the same way that we hear people in, you know, what we might call enlightened spaces, I need to, kill my ego, right? The death
Mhm.
of the ego, as if forcing ourselves into compliance is
Right.
somehow going to be, the right action. What people don't realize is the mind is so good at thinking
Mhm.
that you're probably not going to be able to turn off the thinking. So what the best thing to do, for me at least, and it may not be the best for everyone, but I found that again, this is a really good model, is when you close your eyes, imagine, and this, coincides with the Silva method a little bit, if you're familiar with the Silva mind control method,
Mhm.
but imagine that you've got a big, beautiful bay window that's just out there. You close your eyes and there's this big, beautiful bay window. And the thoughts that come into your mind are just like a bird that flies by, or a deer, that's going by, or something beautiful and you thank it. Hey, thank you for being here, but I'm not interested in following you. I'm not interested in following the thoughts. I'm just here to take in the entire panoramic scene. Right. But inevitably a thought is going to grab our attention and we're going to follow it. And at that point, we can either remind ourselves, oh crap, I'm not supposed to follow my thoughts, or we can just let it go. And what you do is you just let it go and you go back to base. And that's really you just allow the flow of your thoughts to stream as they do without trying to control them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So there's awareness, there's no attachment, and there's no judgment of attachment if
Mm,
attachment takes place.
yes.
Okay. Okay. That sounds doable. Love that advice. Super practical. You said something, you said, this is something that works for me. And I really wanted to just take a few minutes and talk to you about your own experience of
Mhm.
dealing with PTSD, if you're comfortable sharing with us, of course.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, as I was a kid growing up, all right, and PTSD can happen in all stages of life because some stages, some kids are born into war zones, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not a literal war zone like when I was in the army and went to literal war zones, but I was raised by people who had their own issues, right? Which who doesn't, and raised by alcoholics that didn't really give me a whole lot of structure, right? Lots of extremes. And, my dad, divorced my mom at 2, when I was 2, and he kind of checked out, right? I might have seen him, maybe, once a year. He lived about 30 minutes away, but, he kind of was more focused on his own issues. And my mom got remarried when I was very young. And the guy who she remarried, my stepdad at the time, he was a tyrannical alcoholic. I mean, just very very violent. Would just total rage monster. But as he's drinking, he transforms himself into a werewolf of a sort, and then takes it out on little helpless kids. And God bless my mom now. She's not that person anymore. We've made up, which is great. And but as I first learned how to heal, right? My master Ed Stracher, again, who had that conversation with Dennis Stevenson. Well, so he takes us through self-healing mastery, because you've got no business trying to fix somebody else's car if you don't know how to fix your own car. You've got no business trying to heal somebody else if you don't know how to heal yourself. And as I was going through these meditations and tapping into more love than I've ever experienced in my life, tapping into more awareness, being able to let go of the trauma of my past. I I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan, follow a lot of his conversations, and he talks a lot about deprivation tanks. So I'm a big fan of fantasy as well. And there was a TV show that I had seen, Stranger Things, and there's a deprivation tank involved there. It's like, okay, well, wait a minute, I'm starting to tap into what I would call magic. Well, doesn't this little girl 11 also tap into magic, right? For those who were familiar with the show. Well, she
Yeah.
goes into a deprivation tank and then she taps into a whole new dimension. So as I go to this deprivation tank, I'm doing my meditations, I'm getting myself into just more love than I've ever felt before in my life. And then this thought occurs to me, right? I've never been told this, I've never been trained this, but the thought occurs to me, you know what you should do? You should summon the grossest, worst memory of your life. Like, okay, well, why not? So just like I was in a hologram, right, which is actually not all that far from the truth, right? People, contemporaries of Einstein, Max Planck, talks about how consciousness is primary, right?
Yeah.
Physicists talk about how consciousness is primary. Consciousness is everything there is. And so just like a hologram, I create this memory and it's playing, and then I create the version of me, right? A little 6-year-old little boy that, held himself guilty for decades, as if a 6-year-old could somehow, fend off, right? This giant, maniacal man. And so I then projected myself as I was in that deprivation tank, and projected myself right next to that little boy. And I'm a father now. I've got a 10-year-old son. And I've learned, with my own son, because I've wanted to authentically become better, right? And give him something better than what I had. Well, then it encouraged me to be able to find love that I didn't have, to be able to give him love that I didn't have as a child. So being able to love my son gave me the tools I needed to be able to love myself. And
Oof.
yes, and so what I did was I'm holding that little boy's hand. I'm watching this memory, and I'm just taking all of it in. I'm deconstructing all the guilt. I'm separating all the stuff that I was holding on to, and then I'm passing it, filtering it through all this love, and then I pass that awareness to that little boy, and I can feel it. I can feel myself glowing, and then I kneel down, and I turn to him, and I embrace him. Just say, I love you, right? You never have to be afraid again. And I just broke out crying and just started releasing all that stuff. And that's, before we were talking about how, going back to the, root of the problem, right? Where the code was first corrupted. And that's really what I did, is I went to where that code was first corrupted, and I did, maybe a patch kit, in the terms of programming.
Wow. Question. Did meditation help you build up the courage to bring up that really difficult memory? Because, if that voice comes to us, another response could be, no, it's too painful. I'm not ready. Where did you get the courage to say, okay, let's do it?
So I've got two amazing mentors in my life, and I'm so blessed to have them. Right, one is Peter Sage, and he took me through his elite mentorship forum, and working with him, weekly, meeting my peer groups, and Ed Stracher. And meditation, did it give me the courage? Yes. The reason why is because for so long I've been blocking out that signal and only been listening to the noise. But as I started quieting the noise, and the signal started pumping in louder and louder, even though louder was more, actually, let me take that, more clear, not really louder, because it's still a whisper, right?
Mhm.
That intuition is still a whisper, but it's much more clear. And I never would have been able to recognize that whisper for what it was if I hadn't meditated. And I never would have been able to tap into the healing love that I did had I not meditated. And I never would have had the courage to be able to start implementing this stuff if I couldn't actually quiet that noise and increase the signal. So meditation is certainly the crux of everything kind of falling into place.
Wow. And a supportive community that kind of
Yep.
created that safe space for you
Yeah.
to do the
Well,
work.
and and people might, and so often we scoff at the idea of our parents saying, don't hang out with these kids because peer pressure. And like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what people don't realize is that our environment will trump our willpower every time, over time. But if you and I are hanging out, and we're hanging, and then I start, maybe I slip and I'm hanging on to a cliff face, right? You come back on Tuesday and I ain't going to be there. That's
Mhm.
just, no matter what, that environment is going to trump my willpower, no matter how much my intention is to hang on. And when we are surrounded by people who are, looking at the worst scenarios in their life, they feel like they're victims. Life happens to them instead of for them. Right. Everything, Tanaz, I'd also be successful if I had your life. I'd also be successful if I didn't have my mom, treat me the way that she treated me. And when we surround ourselves with people who, one, want the best for us, two, are heading in a progressive manner, right, in a more productive manner, well, we can't help but model ourselves to our environment. That's just how we are. We are adaptable by design, right? We are programmable by design. We do not get a choice on that. What we do get a choice on is how we program ourselves, how we get programmed.
Wow, I love that. So, just a reminder to self that your community matters, right? Who you're with, the conversations you're having, the activities you're engaging in, as small as they might seem, they have such a large impact on
Mm,
our life. Wow, love that. You said something, and I want to talk about that. You said being able to love my son helped me love myself.
yeah.
And it got me thinking, a lot of people say you need to be fully healed before you can love others. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm. We need to be fully healed to be able to fully love others.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we can't have approximations of it, right? I
Hmm.
mean, do if I start off endeavoring towards a goal, do I start off as a master, or do I have to build the steps, right? If I'm walking up a staircase, do I start at the top stair, or do I start at the bottom stair building myself up, right? And so often we have these unrealistic expectations for ourselves, right? I may not know what divine love was when I first started loving my son, but I'll be damned if he didn't unlock a part of me that I didn't realize existed, that I wanted to step up for this little boy. I did not want him to go through what I went through. I wanted to be better. And that allowed me to then start tapping into, well, how do I become better? And, in the same way that, healing pain in the body comes from, curiosity, approaching it with a space of curiosity. right? There's this idea that questions are the steering wheel of the mind. Well, if
Hmm.
I'm not fully healed, well, how can I still love regardless of not being fully healed? How do I start loving myself to a place of being fully healed? Because it's not like love is just not there, and then all of a sudden, hey, I'm healed. Now there's love, right? That just doesn't work that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But do we ever get to a point where we're fully healed?
I guess it depends on the definition,
Hmm.
right? And I think we get to a point where we can fully accept,
Hmm.
right? And if you're familiar with David Hawkins' work, right, Power versus Force, right, acceptance is a very high vibrational space. I think it's like 350. And if we can get to that place of acceptance, well, then, I mean, what more healing needs to occur if we've already accepted it? And then if we, take a step back also and consider perhaps the most psychologically strong way of looking at the world in the lens of this, this body, this person who's having this conversation with you, well, this is my me,
Hmm.
but who I am is something far greater, because I am my soul, and my
Right.
soul chose this path, right? And this might sound silly to people, but again, it's all about models of the world that serve us.
Hmm.
And my soul looked down and said, look at these, look at these people struggling. Look at this life I'm going to have. Look at these lessons I'm going to learn. And why am I going to learn these lessons? Because they're going to point me in the exact space I need to go to. Why did I choose a life, of abuse, emotional and physical? Well, because where did I escape? I escaped into books. What sort of books? Fantasy books. Not
Hmm.
just fantasy books, but fantasy books all around epic camaraderie, brotherly camaraderie that I did not know in my life. And what did Einstein say? Well, the mark of intelligence is not raw intellect, it is imagination, because the brain does not know the difference between imagination and reality. So I'm building these neural pathways and I'm getting myself ready. I'm creating reference points. So once I get to that point of I'm ready to be enlightened, I can look back at my life and say, oh my God, oh my God,
It
right?
makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And, Steve Jobs said that you can never really connect the dots except for looking backwards. And if we choose this idea of why did I go through the, maybe you call it hell, why did I go through the difficult situations I went through as a child, as an adult? Well, because you chose that, because that's how powerful you are. You chose it because you knew that no matter how confusing this world is, that you'd be able to see through it and be able to reach that point of enlightenment. And I mean, is there anything more psychologically strong than that?
Wow. I'm loving this conversation. Yesterday, I just posted on my Instagram, who do you want to be, victim or victor? Like
Yeah.
the choice is always ours. And, like, is life happening to me or for me?
Yes.
And I don't know if what we're saying is 100% true. I don't have full certainty about it, but I do know that this perspective is a much more empowering perspective than to say, I have no control over how I react to life, or, kind of being a victim. So it's that whole argument as well, is like, does God exist? What is spirituality? Does the universe exist? Does energy exist? And I always say, we might never get to a point where we can say 100% this is the truth, but which belief makes you feel more empowered, makes you feel, which belief makes more sense to you? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I love that. And come back to that. I think I can, really help and relieve a lot of people of a lot of anxiety, right? This idea of, 100% truth. Well, I can tell you something with 100%, assurity of the truth.
Hmm.
The truth of the capital T. The truth of the capital T is that nobody knows the truth of the capital T.
Yes.
And so just let it go. You and I could literally be experiencing the exact same event side by side, in the exact same environment, in the exact same atmosphere, the exact same, ambiance. And we're going to walk away with different experiences. And you know what? There's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's 7 billion different versions of the truth. And so find the version of the truth that fits your model of the world, because there's a difference between truth and facts,
Hmm.
right? A fact is something that happened, that's objective. Hey, it happened. Truth is the story around that, right? What's the story? How does that mean to me? How does that land with me? How does that help me? How does that help me progress? And, I think understanding that model of the world can really serve people.
Wow. Wow, wow. I'm loving this conversation. I have like a million questions, but I'm trying to be mindful of time. So I think we should definitely schedule in a second
Oh, I love that.
episode to follow up because the questions, like I want to know, like, what are your thoughts on the soul choosing the parents and circumstances and so many. But
Mhm.
um, question, just my
Yeah.
last question. If you could go back to the version of you, the younger version of you who was experiencing, physical abuse, verbal abuse from your stepfather, knowing what you know today, what would you tell that young kid?
Oh, what I already told him,
That you
right?
are
And
loved.
yeah, exactly. That I took you through that, you are loved, right?
Hmm.
And the thing is when you share love, there's so much more, because there's so much more to it. And there's not, there's three main, areas of awareness.
Hmm.
And, one is intellectual, and intellectual is near meaningless. And what I mean by that is, like, imagine a smoker. A smoker sees the same Surgeon General warning as everyone else. A smoker sees all the information that there's literally no reason for them to put a toxic, stick and light it on fire and suck the fumes, put that in their mouth and start sucking those fumes. So intellectual understanding is near meaningless,
Hmm.
right? So many people know what they should do, but they don't. And knowing but not doing is the same as not knowing. So just because we know something, we may very well be acting in a way in which we don't know. The second is, the emotional. Or the emotional, I'd say that person has, they go to the doctor and say, hey, if you don't quit smoking, you're gonna have a stroke, you're gonna have an aneurysm. Like, oh my gosh, they crumple the cigarettes and they throw it away. Well, the emotional awareness, what happens there is that, behavioral change is highly likely, lasting change is highly unlikely. And well, why would that be? Well, because if we are a smoker and something scared us into quitting, well, aren't we just now a smoker who quit? And there's that resistance. And that resistance, one, it blocks our flow, but then also think of somebody at a gym. If you're holding resistance bands, you can't hold them in perpetuity.
Hmm.
Eventually, you're going to go into muscle failure and you're going to let those go. And what happens if you let those go? Well, you're putting a cigarette back in your mouth. And so then the third level is identity. And identity is what governs our core beliefs, right? Tony Robbins has this idea that the most powerful force in the human psyche is a need to be consistent with their identity, be consistent with our identity. And so we can start to reshape our identity, then everything else changes. And then again, that's as above, so below, but also as below, so above, because we can't just turn the switch on and change our identity. It's these slow movements, these steps, right? I take one step at a time to get to the top of the stairs, right? And so we as we start, understanding the intellectual information, right? Hey, Joshua, little boy Joshua, hey, you're loved. I love you. Well, I don't really feel that though. Well, let me give you a hug. Okay, well, I feel that, but what's the lasting change? Well, let me show you. Look at who I am. Let me tell you about what I've done. And in fact, that's actually a powerful meditation, that we can do. Is we can go back in our minds, right? So as we're meditating, closing our eyes, tapping deep within ourselves, summon that little kid version of ourselves who was desperate for love, who may have been lost, and just share with them what you've done, and imagine their eyes bulging like, you made it. Oh my God, you made it.
Wow. Wow, I love that. I'm going to do that today. That's that's a great meditation that you shared with us. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Wow. Okay, so three types of awareness, which I want to get into the second episode that we do together.
I love it.
I would love for you to break that down even more. But in the meantime, how can people connect with you? How can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah. So if what I'm saying resonates and you're really liking it and you want to hear more, you can reach out to my website at freemefrompains.com. I've helped all sorts of people with, mental as well as physical pains. And you can book a healing plan right there. And what we can do is we can at least get clarity.
Hmm.
Most people have no idea what it is that they want. They have every idea of what they don't want.
Hmm.
And if we know what we don't want, well, we move in the direction of our of our area of focus. If we know what we don't want, guess what we're going to get more of? What we don't want.
What we don't want. Hmm.
Exactly. And so working together, we can start getting clarity, help you get clarity, and actually start healing from, as below, so above, but also the governing agent, the soul being the superset of the body, which is the subset, right? And allow that magic to happen. Because you know what? As Tom Campbell, who founding scientist within the Monroe Institute and NASA scientist, said, when you believe in magic, you live a magical life. And so reach out to my website, Free Me From Pains, book a healing plan, and let's chat. Let's see how we can get you on a road to that sense of inner fulfillment.
Wonderful. I'm going to share that link in the show notes as well, so people have an easier access. Once again, thank you so, so much for sharing all your wisdom with us. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine having you on. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for holding the space. I really appreciate what you do, and it's been my honor.
Wonderful. Thank you once again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Speak soon.